I appreciate it.
Okay.
Is now still a good time for you?
Now is a perfect time.
Awesome, thank you so much. All right, hey, so I'm just gonna get right to it. We've already had our pre-conference and we had the observation. I know it's been about 2 weeks since the observation. Ideally, to get back to you in a few days because of the way this program works. We had to take some more time on it. So I'm gonna start with some questions that I kind of wanted to clarify based on what I saw in your classroom.
Okay.
The first thing is actually a pretty awesome one. Or something that I noticed really didn't seem the same for you, but I've heard other teachers mention how difficult the seventh graders have been for them this year. Have you experienced the same thing?
You know, a lot in the hallways, but typically in class, in the beginning of the year, it was a little rowdy, but we've got them kind of right where we need them to be, and they know what they need to do when they first come in, and they know what the consequence is if they don't follow those expectations. So, I mean, it's been pretty well, other than the unstructured time in the hallway. Yeah.
Absolutely, I like the consequence part right there. Yeah, I felt that when I was walking down the hallway. It was like, okay, this is an interesting energy. I'm sixth grade, you know that, of course.
Yeah.
And when I got in the room, it was just like I walked into a totally different area. It was a really good feeling. So whatever you're doing, keep that up.
Thank you.
And that kind of goes to the next part here. Your classroom management was noticeable the moment I came in the room. The students genuinely seemed to enjoy you. They liked your class. They got along well with each other. We're about 8 weeks into the school year. What did you do to get them to this point?
I think a lot of it is relationship building and just kind of like letting a little bit of myself shine with them, I feel like. Every day I do a daily dose of cuteness, and it starts off the first week. I show them my dog, and I'll be like, here's your daily dose of cuteness, and I'll show them a picture of Lula, and then I'll be like, can I get a aw? And then just as loud as they can, they'll be like, aw.
Yeah.
So then the second week I open it up to the other kids. If they've got a pet at home, they can send me in a picture of their pet, and then they get their little minutes to shine and stuff, and things like that. I get to learn a little bit more about them, and I think animals are kind of like a safe thing for most people, because most people, like, you know, they love animals.
Yeah.
So I mean, we kind of all have that common ground, and it lets the kids know, hey, like this kid in my class has this really cool looking dog, or a really cute looking cat, or a lizard. We've had geckos, we've had not porcupines, hedgehogs, things like that, and it kind of sparks that conversation. So we kind of do a little bit of that all throughout the year, but even at the beginning we do a lot of like activities where we're building trust with each other, and we're learning to speak freely around each other without having any rudeness or things like that. So yeah, we focus on that.
Awesome. And your first answer, you mentioned the expectations, procedures, consequences. So I like that you're mentioning like just getting personal with the kids. I think that it's easy to forget we have so much curriculum and just so many standards to drive through. It can be forgetful to take a step back and just get to know the students. It's definitely working for you. All right, hey, so this one, I noticed your learning target and success criteria, they were on the board. When I went and asked that student in the back of the room what their learning outcome or goal for the day was, they weren't really sure what to say. They kind of knew where to look, but it didn't seem like they like owned it, I guess. Do you discuss these with the class when you put them on the board, or why do you think that student said that?
So I'm trying to be better at that. That's actually one of my goals for the year. So this is only half up for the next day, but so typically after bell work, we'll go over our learning target and success criteria. And then at the end of class, I'll be like, hey guys, are you able to do this, this, and this from the success criteria? And I get kind of an assessment, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle with them. And then I'll know I can move on for the next day, and that's kind of how I do that. Some days I forget, and that's probably the day that I forgot. I don't know if I forgot every class period, but I'm pretty sure I forgot the class period you were in, but you know, hey.
It goes back to driving to the standards, and I totally get that. I've been there, and I am there, so, all right. It was clear that your students knew the ins and outs of the electromagnet while completing the lab. I came in and it seemed like they had quite a bit of background knowledge on it. How much pre-teaching and background knowledge was required for this?
Well, before we get into the electromagnet, we talk a lot about electricity and magnetism themselves. And before we actually did the electromagnet lab, we talked about, you know, what do you think would be able to make this stronger? I showed them a photo of what an electromagnet would look like if you made one at home. And a lot of them noticed there was like a lot of different coils around the core. And so they didn't really know like the terminology for that. But I was like, hey, if you think that you'd make this stronger, what are some things you could do? So a lot of kids would always be like, well, add another battery that's, stronger, or add a second battery on top of that. Or even wrap more wire around like the middle part. That's kind of like the verbiage and stuff that they were using. Otherwise, so when we went into the lab, it was kind of a more structured lab. I like to do full-on inquiry, but it was more structured, telling them, hey, like, let's put more coils around the core. Hey, let's switch out the cores now. And so they were actually able to see how it worked and what makes it stronger based off of how many paper clips it picks up.
Gotcha.
So there's a little bit of pre-teaching, but not a whole lot. They find out more about the strength during it. But beforehand, we do have a big discussion of what do you think would make it be stronger. So that's kind of what we toyed around with.
All right. It almost, it sounds like you guys are nailing the scientific method essentially, and they had pretty good hypothesis or pretty good background knowledge to get on that.
Yeah, it's
That's
pretty
awesome.
cool.
A lot of the conversation that I heard was pretty spot on, and I learned something that day too. So it was cool for me as well.
Nice.
Hey, there was a moment you really stepped into the hallway with this student. It was short. It was about 15 seconds. You had that para in the room. How do you communicate that with your para so they're aware that you're stepping into the hall, but you're not trying to draw attention to the conversation? Like, you nailed it, but how did she know that that was going on?
She's a really great para. She's very in tune. She's very in tune with what's going on in the classroom, and we could both kind of see that this child needed some redirection one-on-one out in the hall. And like, sometimes if we just make eye contact, she knows.
Okay, got
So
it.
I mean, and it doesn't happen every time with a para, but like me and her have that connection where she just knows. And I can step out for like a few minutes and then come back in with that child, and everything's all good. She's wonderful. Otherwise, yeah, it's just something you kind of have to change when you get staff in and out in different pairs and stuff. But with her, it works really well.
You've definitely worked together for at least a little while, because it was kind of cool to see. I think I was probably the only one in the room that noticed it.
Yeah.
So the next step here is talking about some areas of strength, and I am going to read the standards to you. I know that you've read them before, and I'll just kind of show you over here. But the two standards that I thought were the most evident in your class were Standard 2 and Standard 6. And I don't have these memorized, so I just went ahead and typed them out for you. But Standard 2 says it demonstrates competence and content knowledge appropriate to the teaching position, understands and uses key concepts, underlying themes, relationships, different perspectives related to the content area. Student development to make learning experiences in the content meaningful, relates ideas and information within and across the content areas, and understands and uses instructional strategies that are appropriate to the content area. I'm not going to ask you much questions on that. I'm just pointing out this is a strength that you definitely have. It was clear you were the expert in the room with the content. There wasn't a single question that you couldn't answer, but I also liked how you didn't always give them the answer. You kind of guided them to it. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
The second standard is Standard 6. This demonstrates competence in classroom management. That kind of goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago with the para. It creates a learning community that encourages positive social interaction, active engagement, and self-regulation for every student. This establishes, communicates, models, and maintains standards of responsible student behavior, implements classroom procedures, routines, high expectations, like you mentioned before, and instructional time effectively to maximize student achievement. And the last thing, which is something, again, that I would say you have, is that that's a safe and purposeful learning environment. So whatever you're doing, keep it up.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so there's some data that goes along with that as far as your areas of strength, and I was kind of tallying your transitions. I wrote that down on a piece of paper. I have that right here, but that second transition was just right at about 2 minutes, and that was once they had the lab supplies, they were getting them set up, once they were out and kind of getting the lab sheet ready to go. So 2 minutes is pretty quick, pretty efficient. Transition 3 was also right at 2 minutes. That was the lab cleanup. So number 2 and number 3 were some of the most efficient transitions that I've ever seen. Did you work with them on transitions? Is it something the class just naturally sort of brought to the table, or?
I'm gonna be honest, I wish that was me, but they must have had some really good elementary teachers because I haven't really worked on them with that. They just kind of do it.
Well, you don't have to work on it if they're already doing it, so that's good. All right, so even during the initial transition, students remain in their seats, they're in a quiet volume. It's obvious they respect their teacher in the classroom, and even during that time, all eyes were on the teacher, students were engaged. And then at the end of the class, I gave that form of assessment, that Google form, and it looked like the average score was at 78%. I also saw that 90% of the students scored over an 80%. So this shows they were engaged enough to gain understanding. That's definitely a strength of yours.
Thanks.
All right. This part's kind of uncomfortable. That's all right. We've all got room to grow, right?
Yep, room to grow.
And you want to grow as well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Me too.
Yep.
All right. So ironically, the only area I found for growth was also Standard 6. This was classroom management, but more specifically, I would call it material management or supply management.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of class, those lab materials, they were not on the students' tables in order to prevent them from, I'm guessing that they weren't on the tables to prevent them from touching them before the directions,
Yeah.
which can be an effective approach as long as there's a system in place to get the materials out to the groups quickly.
Yeah.
I'll ask a follow-up question now later.
Okay.
And yeah, actually, nice. Yeah, I'll ask that question in a minute here because it's kind of down the line.
Okay.
But that first transition was 8 minutes. This is about 4 times as long as the other transitions throughout the class. And there was only one student out of their seat talking to the lab partner, but that's literally the only thing I saw in that whole 60 minutes that probably needs some improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's kind of asking you some questions here. What was the overall goal of this lesson? Like, really, what did you want the students to accomplish by the end?
Well, I wanted kids to understand what is going to affect the strength of an electromagnet. Biggest thing, if they could explain to me what's going to, make it stronger, pick up more paper clips, because that's one of our biggest standards for that unit is knowing electromagnetism. But also, I wanted them to be able to conduct the investigation, kind of see how things flow within the scientific method, especially with before having those conversations about what do you think would actually make it be stronger, etc. So that was also kind of one of their goals, keeping that skill set and being able to perform a scientific investigation.
Kind of scaffolding onto each other.
Yeah, perfect. So both of those.
So, what do you feel went well with that lesson?
I mean, I honestly, most of them got the target, which was great. So I think the fact getting to the core concept there of what's going to affect the strength of the electromagnet, it made it very easy. Now in some of the classes, which you didn't observe, but the class before that, some of the batteries died.
Oh no.
So that kind of, but those things happen. And then having to go send a kid down to go get more batteries from the office, whatever. We do what we can to make up for that. But that was another thing. I should probably have some extra batteries on hand. But
you're already reflecting. That's awesome.
Yeah, I always, after every lesson, there's things that you wish that you would have done that you changed later. And that was probably one of them, is make sure you have the batteries here. But yeah,
Well, and you were talking earlier about how like the strength of the battery or the coils could affect things. So they kind of saw that in real time too, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Let's see here. How did you feel as you were redirecting students in the room? And again, this only happened that one time. How did that feel in that moment though? That was when you were walking the student out of the room.
Yeah, I feel like when I redirect kids, a lot of the times it's like a second nature. It doesn't face me.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's more of a, hey, like, what I expect you to be doing right now. If you're not following that, there's consequences, and say if that child, when I redirected him, he knows that, from there on out, I would have either called his mom literally right then and there, make him dial his own parent, and I would talk to his parent even with the class going on. I don't like waiting till later because I feel like sometimes it loses that touch with the student, because if the student doesn't know that you're following up with the parent, a lot of times they don't change that behavior. So I don't know, redirections, it doesn't faze me too much. I feel like I wish I had some feeling for it, but it's kind of just like, no, these are my expectations, you gotta follow them,
I think that almost makes it easier sometimes, instead of making it personal, like, here are the rules.
Because
here are the
sometimes
consequences, and it is what it is.
if
right?
you make it personal, you dwell on it too much, and it ruins you, and you're just like, why are they behaving? And it's like, they're middle schoolers, they're gonna do things that they're not supposed to, but they do need that redirection, being like, hey, like, you actually have a purpose here, there's a thing that you're doing. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Do you feel like there was an instructional strategy that effectively worked for you that day, or is there an instructional strategy that maybe I haven't seen that effectively works for you?
Instruction. Let's think.
You did so much that day.
I know.
Like the lab itself, do you?
Yeah.
I don't want to.
No, that's okay. So like labs for one, but I love doing like different discussions for things. So sometimes like I'll show like a little clip of something and having discussion, which brings out different items of discussion from there. So, for example, you weren't in here today, but today we started in our energy unit, and we were talking about how mass can affect the amount of energy that an object has. And so then we're talking about, just because if something has more mass, does that mean it's gonna, if you drop two items at the same time, does that mean one is gonna drop faster than the other, etc. And then, so that was brought up in conversation, which totally went off to another direction, but it led to a stronger discussion of, hey, if we were in a vacuum sealed without any other particles and stuff, a feather and a bowling ball will hit the ground at the exact same time. So I actually got to show that video. So my instructional strategy is just a lot of discussion, because they'll bring up things and misconceptions, and even though if it might go a little bit off task, it's still related to science and the content, so I have no problem taking that time to go into that. So yeah, that's a strategy I love discussion. I probably use it more than most people, but I love it, and it's nice to get the kids talking.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think in science it works. You mentioned inquiry labs earlier, and like I don't know, it's easy to stand up there and tell the students what it is and say, here's how it goes.
Yes.
But it can be hard sometimes too, standing back and being like, that's not totally right, but you kind of hope they get there. And
Yes.
it lets them take more control of the conversation.
We do more full inquiry labs towards the end of the year. So like right now, since we're kind of at the beginning of the year, it's more a little more cookie cutter. And then we do a little bit more like guided inquiry near around winter break. And then the second half of the year, we're doing more full inquiry. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned this already, but what will you keep the same in the future for this lesson or this lab, and what might you do differently? You already mentioned the battery thing.
Batteries
Yeah.
for sure. I think I'd also have a little bit more electrical tape on hand, because some kids do want to try, because we tape together 2 batteries, So we'll tape together 3, because some kids are like, well, what would happen if I added a 3rd battery? Hey, I think that's a cool question, but we need obviously way more batteries for that if every child's going to do that. We also need way more electrical tape. I also kind of want to get like thermal gloves, just because sometimes the core can get a little hot, and things like that would make it a little bit easier. But the kids, they knew the safety, they knew what to do, but I think it would make it easier for maneuvering if I had like thermal gloves or something like that.
Gotcha.
But just different supplies.
Different supplies, so maintaining some expectations, and just and I'm guessing funding is a part of that too. So
Yeah.
all right. Planning for the future, strengths to reinforce. So these are some things that you do really well, and that I would love to continue to see in the future in your classroom. So those teacher-student interactions, they were friendly, they were respectful. Students show respect for each other. I'm not going to ask any questions on these, but as you hear these things, reflect on it, ask yourself what it is that you've done to get to this point, and just keep doing it. Directions were clear. They're given in time frames to keep students on task and organized. Your classroom's instruction was in line with the district curriculum. And again, your standards were on the board. Electromagnetic forces, ask questions about data to determine the factors that affect the strength of electric and magnetic forces. And the last things, your questions were above yes or no responses. You had some rigorous questions, which I certainly helped with. I think that would probably help drive those conversations and discussions you're talking about. All right. Oh, no, the rest of this is for me. All right, so that's all I have for you, Mrs. Watkins. Do you have any questions for me at all, or anything else that I didn't ask you that you wanted to say about that lesson?
No, I think I'm good.
All right, cool. All right.
Awesome.
I'm good too. Thank you so much for your time
Thank
today.
you for the feedback. It's
Yeah.
always nice to hear it from other people, especially other teachers.
Yeah.
So